It is the middle of the night in February, on a motorway in central California. A lorry goes past, doing 70, loaded to the roof with plain wooden boxes. The boxes are full of bees, several million of them. They are not lost, and they are not being rescued. They are commuting. Behind that lorry comes another one. Behind that one, another, all winter, all heading the same way. Last year, American farmers paid more than $400 million to rent them. Not for honey. The honey, as we shall see, barely matters anymore. This is the story of how the bee got a job. Homo Spendens. Number 9. The rented hive. California grows almonds on an industrial scale across more than 1 million acres of trees in a single long valley. 8 of every 10 almonds on Earth begin here. Seen from the air, the valley does not look like an orchard. It looks like a carpet. The trees are packed tighter than they once were because land is money and almonds are money. In late February, the whole valley turns white with blossom, more or less overnight. For about 2 weeks a year, it is the most beautiful industrial site on Earth. And the almond tree, for all of its success, has a personal problem it has never solved. It cannot pollinate itself. Its flowers refuse their own pollen. Nearly every almond tree has the same fault. To make a single almond, pollen has to travel from its tree to a completely different tree. The pollen does not fly. It has no legs. It waits for a lift. Wind is unreliable. What is reliable, flower to flower, thousands of times a day, is a bee. Then comes the timing problem, and it is a serious one. Every almond tree in the valley blooms at the same time in those same few February weeks. Miss the window and there is no crop. There is no second chance. So for 11.5 months, the valley needs almost no bees at all. And for 2 weeks, it needs more or less all of them. 1 million acres of the same tree, all wanting attention at the same moment, is not a farm. It is an appointment. No local bee population could ever cover a job like that. Nothing alive survives on 2 weeks of work a year, which leaves exactly one option. If the workforce cannot live here, the workforce must visit. And a visiting workforce, as every employer eventually learns, charges differently. Enter the commercial beekeeper. Not the neighbor with one hive at the bottom of the garden, but a business running thousands. His entire year is built backwards from February, the way a toy shop's year is built backwards from Christmas. In midwinter, the hives are stacked onto wooden pallets, the pallets onto lorries, and the lorries point west. They come from the Dakotas, from the Midwest, from the South. The whole map tips towards California. The hives arrive through the winter, yard by yard, and wait for the first flower to open. The size of this is worth a moment. The almond bloom asks for nearly 3 million hives. The entire United States keeps roughly that many, which is to say the orchard has requested politely every working bee in America. Every February the request is granted. It happens on schedule in plain sight, and almost nobody on that road knows what they are passing. The grower rents 2 hives for every acre of trees, and the trees run past the horizon. For the grower, the bee bill lands among the biggest of the year. It is the only line on the invoice that can fly away. The hives are set down along the orchard edges in tidy rows, like huts on a building site. For the next few weeks the bees do what bees have always done. They visit flowers, they carry pollen, they make almonds happen at a rate no machine can match. The bees have not been told any of this. They believe they are simply out looking for food. They are, in fact, on a business trip. When the bloom closes, the lorries return, and the workforce is driven home or onwards. Then it is cherries in the northwest, blueberries in the east, and honey somewhere in between, if there is time. A hive can spend more of its year in transit than at home. For some hives, the commute simply never ends. Then, some weeks later, the paperwork catches up, and the paperwork is where this story turns. At the last count, a hive's attendance at the almond bloom cost just over $200. That was 15% more than the year before. It is roughly triple what any other crop pays for the same bee. Cherries argue, apples beg. The almond simply pays. It was not always a rich contract. 20 years ago the fee was small. Then the orchards spread, and the fee doubled inside 2 years. It has never come back down. The almond needs the bee more than the bee needs the almond. Add the whole valley up, and the yearly bill for bee attendance now comes to more than $400 million. Not for honey, not for wax, for turning up. And here is the fact that quietly rearranged an entire industry. All the honey in America, every jar, every bear-shaped bottle, a full year of it. All of it is worth less than that one bee bill. Renting out the bees now out-earns the thing the bees actually make. A single hive earns more in its 2 February weeks than its honey brings in all year. And the honey side is not merely the smaller business, it is a shrinking one. Last year, America made a good deal less honey than the year before. The average hive makes less honey than it used to, which rather settles what the job is now. The beekeepers know their history, and the history stings a little. A generation ago, hauling hives was pocket money, a side job between honey harvests. The rental check was the extra. The honey was the business. Then the almond orchards more than tripled in size, and the side job ate the business. The modern hive, in other words, is a machine that happens to leak honey. A machine, mind you, with running costs, and the running costs have teeth, because the beekeeper's rent is money coming in, and money coming in is always the flattering number. The costs start the moment the bloom ends, and they never stop. The bees must be fed through winter on syrup, sugar water, and pollen patties by the truckload. Feeding an animal so that it can go and gather food is, the beekeeper admits, an unusual arrangement. The bees must be treated for a parasite called the varroa mite, which is every bit as pleasant as it sounds. They must be loaded, driven, unloaded, inspected, reloaded, and occasionally apologized to. And then, routinely, they die anyway. Beekeepers have always expected to lose about 2 hives in every 5, year after year. Some die of mites, some die of the cold, and some die of nothing anybody can name. It has been studied for years. The bees have not explained themselves. Lately, though, the winters have stopped being reasonable. The most recent counted year was the worst on record. American beekeepers lost more than half of everything they kept. No other industry replaces half its machinery every year and calls that normal. A team of farm researchers added up a single year of dead hives. The bill ran well over $100 million. The shortage did something to the rent as well. The year the bees died in record numbers was the year the fee jumped hardest. A shortage in any species does the arguing by itself. Replacement, at least, can be bought. There is a catalogue for everything. A new queen costs $22. A whole starter hive with bees, a queen, and a box of ambition runs somewhat more. There is presumably a loyalty scheme. Tens of thousands of people spend their working year driving, feeding, and counting bees. The numbers still work, but only because February keeps paying and keeps paying more. And wherever there is money left over in nature, something arrives to eat it. In the weeks before the bloom, a full hive is worth more than it will ever be worth again. Every box in the yard is briefly a small safe with a flight risk. So people steal them. Not a jar from a shed. Whole hives, whole stacks of them, lifted at night by forklift. In a single recent year, California recorded over 3,000 stolen hives. Across the last decade, the missing hives run to 10,000, worth millions. The stolen hives are driven into the same orchards and rented out. Same bloom, different landlord. The crime has its own name, bee rustling, and it now has its own detectives. The county at the center of it appointed a deputy sheriff, who keeps 1,200 hives of his own. His caseload and his hobby are unavoidably the same subject. It takes a beekeeper to catch a beekeeper. Some keepers now hide trackers inside the boxes, making the hive the only farm animal with a phone. It appears to work. Since the detectives arrived, reported thefts have fallen from thousands to a few hundred. The bees once again have not been consulted. They work whichever orchard they wake up in. The rental business has never looked healthier, which is usually the moment its biggest customer starts wondering whether it needs the bees at all, which returns us at last to the almond tree, the employer that started all this. Tree breeders have spent years on the obvious question, one nobody thought to put to the bees. What if the tree could pollinate itself after all? Such trees now exist. They are called self-fertile, and they accept their own pollen. A self-fertile orchard needs half the hives, or fewer. Even the self-fertile tree, it must be said, does a little better with a bee or two about. The tree has gone from employer to occasional client. The visits simply stop being necessary, which, in any rental market, is the beginning of the end. About 7% of the valley has switched so far. A corner of the carpet, no more. But most of the new trees going into the ground are the self-fertile kind. The rental market's biggest customer is breeding its way out of the relationship. Nobody has told the bees this either. Nobody intends to. For now, demand still rises. The fees still climb. The lorries still roll south every winter, but somewhere in a nursery stands a row of small trees that will never need the lorry. By spring, the lorries are gone, and the valley goes quiet for another year. The arrangement they leave behind is now simply how almonds are made. The almond tree cannot pollinate itself, and a whole valley of them blooms in a single February. So the bees of an entire country are loaded onto lorries and driven to the trees. And renting them out now earns more than all the honey they make. Homo Spendens has kept animals for meat, for milk, and for company. This one it keeps for attendance. The bee ends up with a wage, a commute, a bodyguard, and no idea. The next time a bag of almonds passes through your kitchen, you will know what it took. An employee in February who was driven there. Next time, the documentary considers a quieter arrangement. A monthly bill that climbs every year on its own, and the guess hiding inside it.